There is a player sitting at your table right now who should not be beating you. You have studied more. You have played more hours. You understand the theory. You know the ranges. And yet somehow they are taking your chips, session after session, not because they are smarter, not because the cards favor them, but because of something that has nothing to do with cards, nothing to do with math, and everything to do with who they have decided to be before they sat down. That invisible thing is identity, and it is the most powerful force at any poker table, more powerful than position, more powerful than stack size, more powerful than any solver output you have ever studied. Here is the truth that changes everything. You do not need to become a great player before you start acting like one. You need to start acting like one before you become great. Not as a performance, not as pretense, as a commitment to the person you are actively, deliberately, in real time, constructing. This video is not about cards. It is about identity, about the decision made before the first hand is dealt, about who you are going to be today. Because that decision, made consciously or unconsciously, determines everything that follows. The calls you make, the folds you make, how opponents read you, how you read them, what happens inside you when the variance arrives, all of it, determined by identity. Stay until the end, because the final shift in this video is the one that most players never make, and it is the one that separates the players who understand poker from the players who actually win. Most players approach the poker table with a question they would never say out loud but carry in every decision they make. The question is, am I good enough for this? It lives in the slight hesitation before a 3-bet, in the fold that happens a half second too quickly on a marginal river spot, in the checkback that avoids confrontation, when confrontation is exactly what the situation rewards, in the apology almost made when a bluff gets called, in the private relief when a big pot is avoided rather than won. This question, am I good enough for this, is the most expensive leak in poker. More expensive than any pre-flop mistake. More expensive than any post-flop error. Because it contaminates every decision before the decision is made. It introduces a filter between what you know and what you do, between your intellectual understanding of the correct play and your actual execution of it under pressure. And here is what makes this leak invisible. It disguises itself as caution. It calls itself discipline. It describes itself as patience, as bankroll management, as emotional control, and sometimes it genuinely is those things. But often, more often than most players are willing to admit, it is fear wearing the costume of strategy. It is the identity of someone who is not yet sure they belong here, running the decisions of someone who should be. Here is a question that will change the next session you play. Before you sit down, before you look at a single card, ask yourself this: who am I being today? Not what strategy am I playing? Not what ranges am I using? Who am I being? What identity am I bringing to this table? Because the table will respond to that identity the moment you sit. Before you bet, before you speak, before you act, the table reads who you are, and it will treat you accordingly. But here is what most players don't realize. That identity is not fixed. It is not determined by your results last month or your bankroll right now or how many years you have been playing. Identity is a choice. A continuous, renewable, repeatable choice, made fresh at the start of every session. This is where everything changes. In 1955, a young man walked into the offices of a nuclear research facility in Oslo and applied for a position as a senior research physicist. He had no formal credentials, no documented experience. What he had was the behavioral certainty of someone who had done this work for years. He was hired, and for the next 2 years, he performed the job with sufficient competence that no one questioned him until he chose to leave. This story is not about deception. It is about something psychologists now understand with remarkable precision, that the human brain, including yours, does not begin with identity and then produce behavior. It works in the other direction. Behavior, performed consistently and with commitment, produces identity. You do not feel confident and then act confident. You act confident in the specific behavioral sense of making confident choices, taking confident positions, occupying space confidently, and then you feel it. This is not philosophy. This is neuroscience. The neural pathways associated with specific behavioral patterns are reinforced by repetition of those behaviors regardless of whether the initial performance was authentic. The brain does not distinguish, at the architectural level, between genuine confidence and performed confidence maintained through commitment. What it registers is the pattern, and patterns, repeated enough, become structure. Structure, default, becomes identity. Amy Cuddy's research at Harvard demonstrated this with physical posture, that holding expansive, confident body positions for as few as 2 minutes produces measurable hormonal changes that make subsequent performance under pressure objectively better. But the deeper implication is not about posture. It is about the relationship between behavioral commitment and psychological reality. Act the part fully enough, long enough, and the part starts acting you. For the poker player, this is not a motivational idea. It is a strategic instrument, the player who decides, before the session, who they are going to be today, and then executes that identity through every behavioral choice, every sizing, every timing, every way they occupy their seat and manage their stack, is not pretending. They are constructing, actively, deliberately, brick by brick. And here is what makes this so important. The table is watching. Perception is not a secondary consideration in poker. It is not the soft, psychological side of a primarily mathematical game. Perception is the game. Everything that happens at a poker table, every decision your opponent makes about whether to call or fold, bet or check, attack or retreat, is mediated by their model of you. And their model of you is built from data. The data of your behavior, your sizing, your timing, your posture, your reactions, the way you handle chips, the way you handle bad beats. This means that every action you take is simultaneously a poker play and an identity broadcast. You are never just betting. You are betting and transmitting information about who you are. You are never just folding. You are folding and updating the model your opponents are building. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that most players miss completely, is that this process can be managed deliberately, strategically, with the precision of an architect. Here is what elite players understand that average players do not. The identity you project at the table determines the range of responses available to your opponents. If you project strength, consistent, calibrated, unshakable, your opponents will play more carefully against you. They will give you more credit on your bets. They will fold to your pressure more readily. They will avoid marginal confrontations, not because your hand is stronger, because their model of you makes resistance feel more costly than it actually is. You have changed the economics of every hand you play before a single card is dealt. Conversely, if you project uncertainty, through hesitations that leak weakness, through bet sizes that apologize for themselves, through reactions that reveal the bad beat hit harder than it should have, your opponents will attack those signals. Not consciously. They will not think, this player seems weak, I will bluff them. They will feel it. They will experience the presence of an exploitable opponent as an opportunity that presents itself naturally, and they will act on it. This is why the identity shift is not a psychological nicety for players who are already technically advanced. It is the foundation, the load-bearing wall beneath everything else. You can know every solver output in existence and still lose consistently to a player with a lower technical level who projects unshakable belief in their own decisions, because that player is making the table harder. And hard tables produce errors, and errors produce results. And here's the part nobody talks about. There is a specific kind of player that the poker world produces regularly. A player who has studied extensively, who understands the theory at a sophisticated level, who could articulate the correct play in almost any situation described to them away from the table, and who consistently underperforms that knowledge when the session is live. The gap between their theoretical competence and their actual results is significant, persistent, and deeply frustrating to them. This player is almost never suffering from a knowledge problem. They are suffering from an identity problem. Specifically, the identity they carry to the table is the identity of someone who is still becoming, someone working toward the level they aspire to, rather than operating at it. And that identity, however accurate it may be as a historical description of their journey, is toxic as a present-moment operating system. Because the table does not care about your journey. The table responds to what you are right now. Today. This hand. The solution is not to acquire more knowledge. The solution is to make a decision a clear, committed, non-negotiable decision that the version of you who sits at this table today is operating from the identity of the player you intend to become, not aspiring to it, not working toward it, operating from it. This does not require you to believe it fully at first. It requires only that you commit to the behavior that identity produces. The belief follows the behavior. Always. Machiavelli understood this. When he wrote that a prince must know how to be many things, how to project exactly what the political situation requires, rather than what the private emotional reality feels, he was describing something that poker teaches through money rather than territory. The prince who survives is not the most authentic prince. The prince who survives is the one most skilled at being what the situation demands. At the poker table, what the situation demands is that you be the player who belongs here, who is comfortable here, who has made the decision to own this table, regardless of what last month's results or your internal narrative might suggest. But here is something that might surprise you. This is not as far from where you are as you think. Before we go to the next layer of this transformation, and what comes next is the most practically applicable idea in this entire video, there is something I need to tell you about the gap between where most players are and where they want to be. That gap is not a knowledge gap. The information exists. The frameworks exist. The complete system for building the identity, the mental architecture, the strategic thinking, and the emotional discipline that everything in this video describes. It exists, structured in exactly the order that produces real change rather than isolated insight. The Mind of a Grinder Complete Collection. 10 books, not 10 collections of poker tips. 10 systematic frameworks for building a poker mind from the inside out. The identity work, the mental game. The decision-making structure, the emotional discipline under variance, the strategic thinking at the table level, the session level, and the career level. Everything in one complete architecture. Here is what makes this moment important. Right now, this week only, the complete collection of 10 books is available for $29.90. The full system, all 10 volumes. After this launch window closes, each book will be priced individually at $29.90 each. You read that correctly. The entire collection, everything, for what a single volume will cost once this week ends. The window is closing. The price is moving. If something in this video is landing, if the identity concept is clicking, if you are recognizing yourself in the gap between what you know and what you execute, then the collection is the structured path forward, not a single idea. The complete architecture. The link is in the pinned comment. This week, before the window closes. Now let us go deeper, because what I am about to describe is the specific mechanism by which the identity shift produces better decisions in real time. And it is not what you think. Decision-making in poker is almost never what players describe it as when they review their hands. They say, I made this decision because of the pot odds, because of the read, because of the range advantage. And sometimes this is accurate. But more often, the real sequence is, their emotional state produced an inclination toward a specific action, and their analytical mind then constructed a justification for that action using the correct technical language. The decision came first. The reasoning followed. This happens so fast, so automatically, that most players genuinely cannot distinguish between analysis that drove a decision and rationalization that followed one. This is not a character flaw. It is how the brain works under conditions of pressure and uncertainty. The emotional processing system is faster than the analytical system. By the time conscious reasoning has formed an opinion, the emotional system has already loaded a preferred action. Reasoning arrives to find a conclusion already waiting, and it does one of two things. It endorses the conclusion. This is rationalization. Or it overrides the conclusion. This is the difficult, effortful, cognitively expensive act of deliberate decision-making. The player who operates from a weak identity is almost always rationalizing. They feel uncertain. The emotional system loads a cautious defensive action, a check, a fold, a small bet, and the analytical mind arrives to find the language of pot odds and range advantage already attached to that action. They call it analysis. It is the disguise that caution wears when caution is the dominant emotional state. The player who has made the identity shift, who is committed to being the player who belongs here, who has the composure of someone who has navigated pressure before, This player's emotional system loads different defaults. The inclinations that arise from confidence, from the felt sense of competence, from the identity of someone who makes correct plays under pressure, are structurally different from the inclinations that arise from uncertainty. This is why identity is not soft. It is not the emotional support structure for the real work of technical study. Identity is the operating system. Technical knowledge is software. Software running on a corrupted operating system produces corrupted outputs regardless of how good the software is. Fix the operating system and the same software runs clean. This is not metaphor. This is the actual functional relationship between psychological state and decision quality in high-stakes performance environments. Let us talk about what this looks like in practice, in the actual, specific, observable behaviors that distinguish a player operating from a strong identity versus a weak one, because the gap is visible, if you know where to look. The first observable is bet sizing. A player operating from a weak identity leaks uncertainty through sizing inconsistency. Their value bets are slightly smaller than optimal because something in them is asking for permission to win the pot rather than demanding it. Their bluffs are slightly smaller than optimal because something in them is protecting against the full cost of being caught. The sizing is a direct expression of the level of conviction behind the bet. Conviction is a function of identity. The player who has decided they belong here sizes with consistency because the conviction behind the action is clean. The second observable is reaction management. How a player responds to adverse outcomes, a bad beat, a bluff getting called, is not primarily a function of how much they care about the money. It is a function of how much that outcome challenges their identity. For the player still asking, "Am I good enough?" a bad beat is not just a lost pot. It is evidence in an ongoing internal trial about their worthiness. That evidence is processed emotionally, and the processing contaminates the next decision. For the player who has made the identity shift, a bad beat is simply a piece of information about variance. It does not challenge the identity because the identity is not built on outcomes. It is built on the commitment to process. The third observable is table presence. Certain players, when they sit down, change the texture of the table. Others start playing differently, slightly more carefully, slightly less aggressively. Not because any hands have been played, because the new player's presence has transmitted something. The something is identity, the felt sense of encountering a player who knows they belong here. This is not magic. It is information, processed by human social cognition at a speed below conscious awareness, and it changes outcomes. Here is the deepest level of this concept, where Machiavelli meets modern psychology in a way that changes how you think about every hour you spend at a table. Machiavelli wrote about what he called Virtu, not virtue in the moral sense, but capability, active force, the decisive quality that shapes circumstances rather than submitting to them. He contrasted it with fortuna, chance, variance, the random distribution of outcomes that no strategy can fully control. His central argument is that the prince who has developed sufficient virtu can subdue fortuna, not eliminate it, not escape it, but refuse to be governed by it, to remain in the driver's seat even when the road is bad. At the poker table, virtu is not your technical skill. Virtu is the identity you bring. The player who has made the identity shift, who has committed fully and without reservation to being the player who belongs here, who makes good decisions, who maintains composure under variance, who operates from the authority of someone who has chosen to own this table. This player has developed virtu in Machiavelli's exact sense. They have built an internal structure that is resistant to the destabilization that fortuna, variance, constantly attempts to produce. This resistance is not emotional suppression. It is not the brittle stoicism of someone who pretends the bad beats do not hurt. It is the genuine psychological stability that comes from having your identity anchored in something that variance cannot touch. Not results, not outcomes, not how this hand went or how this session is going, but in the quality of your process, in the commitment you made when you sat down, in the person you decided to be today. And here is what is remarkable about this. The more fully you commit to this identity, the more completely you inhabit the behavioral reality of the player you intend to become, the more it becomes true. Not as a trick of perception, as a genuine developmental reality. The neural pathways associated with this behavioral pattern strengthen. The emotional defaults that serve this identity deepen. The gap between the performance of the identity and the authentic possession of it narrows month by month, session by session, hand by hand, until one day you realize that the performance has become the person. This is the shift that separates amateur players from professionals, not the technical knowledge, the identity, the decision about who you are when you sit down. There will come a session, and you will know when it arrives, because it will feel different in a way you cannot entirely explain, where the identity is not a decision you made at the start. It is simply who you are, where the composure is not performed but genuine, where the confidence in your decisions is not manufactured from commitment but earned from the accumulated evidence of thousands of correct processes executed under real pressure. That session is not the end. It is the beginning of the version of you that the work has been building toward. Poker is not a game where the best cards win. Poker is not even a game where the best strategy wins. Poker, at the level that matters, is a game where the best identity wins. The player who has decided, without reservation, who they are at the table, and who executes that identity across the full complexity of a session, with all its bad beats and missed draws and coolers and moments of doubt, that player is operating at a level that most players never reach. Not because they are smarter, because they made a decision that most players never make. The decision to be, fully and without apology, the player they intend to become, before they have earned it, before the results confirm it, before the world has officially recognized it, simply because they decided. That decision is available to you, right now, before the next hand, before the next session, before the next moment when the bad beat arrives and asks who you are. Leave a comment that is honest, not a generic response. Tell me this: what is the identity you have been carrying to the table that is not the identity you want? What version of yourself shows up when the session gets hard? And what is the identity you are committing to, starting now? I read every comment. This conversation is the one that matters. Like this video if it landed. Subscribe to Mind of a Grinder if you are serious about the work. The pinned comment has the collection, the complete architecture for everything this video described, 10 books, this week's price before the window closes, and carry this into your next session, not as a technique, as a decision, the decision about who you are. The cards will follow.